SB 769 is focused on infrastructure financing broadly, including housing-related infrastructure alongside transportation, water, energy, and other essential systems. Today's hearing focuses on infrastructure financing, where California's infrastructure stands, how we can modernize financing tools, and how infrastructure investment supports economic development and good-paying union jobs across the state. This is an informational hearing open to the public. No votes will be taken today. Now it is my honor to introduce California State Treasurer Fiona Wong.
Thank you. Thank you to Connie and the Ledge team, as well as Senator Caballero and her team for authoring the bill and getting it, to the other house. And we wanted to have this informational hearing because we feel like this is a very important bill that will actually create more housing and more jobs and everything that the state wants. This is my fourth elected position, and 3 of them have been in deficit situations. And so when we do have money, some of the money goes to infrastructure, but we know that there's billions of infrastructure needed here in California. I'm also a real estate tax accountant, and I chair SIDLAC and TCAC, our tax credit and bond used to subsidize and build more affordable housing. Thanks to Governor Newsom, he has allocated 500 more each year for our state low income tax credits, that 4% tax credits that must be linked to the bonds. And so it has been a very, very competitive process, but for the last 7 years, we have built new construction for affordable housing, but really focused on the extremely low and very low individuals. So about 50% AMI and below. And what is missing is the missing middle. Housing for, teachers and firefighters and government workers. There is not a lot of assistance. And after the Great Recession, cities and counties said they no longer are going to provide infrastructure for different types of projects, especially housing. And so that has really stymied the ability of developers to build single-family homes, for example, in the Central Valley, in the Inland Empire, because they just can't pencil their projects if they have to build the streets and the roads, the pipes, and the wastewater treatment plants. I mean, there's so much that goes into infrastructure and housing. So this bill, thanks to my chief deputy, Patrick Henning, he's been also noodling this issue over with me for the last couple of years. And my initial idea was how do we create an infrastructure revolving loan fund so that people can use the fund, and then as soon as the buildings is up and running, they can pay it back so that other people can use it. But I really focused on housing. And I believe that this bill is going to really jumpstart the housing that we need for the middle income. The workforce is what we're always talking about. So I thank all of the stakeholders here for being a part of this, testifying on the bill, but also providing informational support here so that we can better understand what the challenges are, what the barriers are, what we need more of, and then we can be better advocates when we are testifying on behalf of the bill next year. So thank you all for coming, and look forward to this hearing.
So much. If the first panel can is the one to the seat. Thank you. All right. Our first panelist is Jeff Braun, a principal at ENGO. Is it NGO? Okay. Incorporated with over 25 years of engineering experience on major infrastructure projects across California. He is a retired U.S. Army engineer officer and an active leader with the American Society of Civil Engineers, having served as president of both the Orange County branch and the LA section, and co-chairing the 2025 California Infrastructure Report Card. Jeff, thank you so much for being here. ASCE's infrastructure report card is often cited as the benchmark for understanding infrastructure conditions. Can you share where California stands today and what the findings tell us?
Absolutely. Thank you again. On behalf of American Society of Engineers, I want to thank all of you, especially Treasurer Ma, the opportunity to present the findings of our 2025 report card on California's infrastructure. California's infrastructure is the backbone of our economy, our communities, and our daily lives. The report card was prepared by over 130 engineers and infrastructure experts from the academic, public, and private sectors who evaluated 17 categories from roads to bridges, energy, water, and schools. The overall grade for California, a C-, is not a reflection of the dedication of our workforce, but a snapshot of the challenges we face and the opportunities ahead. This is not a grade you should settle for. As the nation's most populous state and the world's fourth largest economy, California's infrastructure endures exceptional demands and accelerated deterioration. Additionally, our infrastructure faces unique pressures beyond having the highest usage rates in the nation. It is subject to extreme weather, ranging from scorching heat to freezing temperatures, along with high winds and rain. Our geologic conditions that provide beautiful settings along the coast and in the mountains also bring significant hazards such as earthquakes and slope stability concerns. Much of our infrastructure is several decades old. California has over 25,000 bridges, and 65% of them are over 50 years old, 17% over 75 years old. The cost to repair and keep those bridges, and all other infrastructure along with those, up to current standards will only get more expensive as they continue to age. We have some of the strictest environmental regulations in the United States. Many of the regulations were initiated with the best of intentions, but they also extend schedules and increase infrastructure project costs because of extended planning and permitting processes. In addition, the way these have been implemented and sometimes used by special interests has killed projects that are sorely needed. Next slide, please. The overall grade for California infrastructure remains unchanged in 2019, although you can see that some of the categories have gone up and some have gone down. And our infrastructure is one notch below the national average of C. The lowest grades of D were assigned to energy, inland waterways, levees, roads, and stormwater. These sectors typically suffer from outdated funding models, aging assets, and insufficient public investment. They're not the sexy types of projects that inspire ballot measures or passionate political support like some other categories, but they are still essential and require significant resources. For example, levees. There are over 7 million Californians living in flood-prone areas that are protected by more than 13,800 miles of levees, many of which are outdated and undersized for modern flood events. 28%, nearly 1/3 of our roads are considered to be in poor condition, ranking amongst the worst of all states. Our ports and rail systems receive the highest grades after improving to Bs, with aviation, energy, and hazardous waste also seeing improvements. One common theme you see there is these categories benefit from varied funding sources, including private investment and federal support. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act delivered over $53 billion to California and supported 3,400 projects statewide. 70% of that funding went to transportation projects. The IIJ funding is a critical lifeline, but it expires in 2026, and there is no guarantee of renewal. Project owners need funding clarity and certainty to move forward confidently. Dams, drinking water, schools, and stormwater saw declines, reflecting underfunding and infrastructure that has exceeded its intended design life. Another potential cause for these lower grades is that it's difficult for policymakers to make decisions because it's difficult to gather data to make those informed prioritization and funding decisions. These categories are out of sight and out of mind for some and can be taken for granted. California has over 1,500 dams supplying 70% of our water and 15% of our electricity. 78% of the dams are over 50 years old. And 95 high hazard dams, the ones whose failure would result in significant life or property loss, were rated less than satisfactory in 2024. Next slide. So how do we address this issue? California Infrastructure Report Card Executive Committee developed 4 recommendations to raise the grade. To sustain California's economic leadership and modernize our infrastructure, we must ensure robust, predictable funding, collaborate across public, private, and regional boundaries, educate our neighbors about the important role infrastructure plays in our daily lives, and streamline permitting and reduce the regulatory hoops required to get projects approved and constructed. This requires leveraging federal, state, local, and private sector resources, which can only occur with strong leadership from our elected and appointed officials. Senate Bill 769 is an example of the new thinking that is required to address our significant underfunding of infrastructure. The Golden State Infrastructure Corporation is a fresh approach to complement the traditional funding sources that must still be maintained. Taking out, this cannot replace current funding structures. It needs to complement those funding structures. We cannot reduce other funding because of this. Every dollar invested in infrastructure pays dividends in jobs, safety, and economic growth. Underinvestment costs California families and businesses through hidden taxes, such as lost time, higher repair costs, and reduced safety. With strategic investment and leadership, California can turn its infrastructure from a liability to a competitive advantage. Let's work together to build a stronger, safer, and more prosperous California for generations to come. Thank you. I welcome your questions and discuss how we can move forward.
Anyone have any questions? I have one question. What are other states doing? Are they struggling? They have C- grades like California? Are they doing better? I mean,
it is a mix. I'd say this is probably somewhat average. Some are higher, some are in the B- C range, but this is somewhat typical across the country because costs have gone up. It is difficult with resources, labor, material costs to keep funding, and especially I think with the downturn you had mentioned that some funding sources changed back in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and they have not recovered.
so are other states also coming up with creative solutions like us, or can't be the first one?
No, there are other states also looking at other creative solutions, and I know we were talking earlier with Mike about this isn't a completely new idea, but I think applying it here is a fresh idea that is needed, and there are luckily examples of how it has been successful elsewhere.
Question. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to introduce Bob Burris. Bob is the Deputy Chief Economic Development Officer for Rural Counties Representative of California. RCRC, for those who don't know, is a 40-county advocacy and service organization representing rural California. And in its role, Bob supports efforts to improve infrastructure, economic resilience, long-term growth in rural communities. And so thank you for joining us. I'd like to kind of start out with questions like, from the rural county perspective, how does aging infrastructure impact community resilience and economic opportunity, and really why that access to flexible financing tools is so important?
Well, thank you for the opportunity and the question. Thank you, Secretary Moff, staff, for having me here today. When you talk about rural infrastructure, I'll summarize. It's tough. It's tough. If we have in just about a few minutes here, what we see in our 40 very diverse counties. Think about rural counties. We're talking about Modoc and Del Norte to the north, the Eastern Sierra, the Central Coast, and all the way down to Imperial. There's a variety of needs, variety of climates, cultures, and support. And so what we see when we travel around to these counties, more than anything else, and I appreciate your presentation, is the capacity within these counties to be able to address, actually, I should say, to identify where their major needs are, create priorities, and try to address those concerns. And when I say capacity, some of these counties literally have a handful of people handling building issues, permitting, public works, even fire suppression. I mean, if you can imagine, very small. So the level of personnel and expertise is really challenging when you see a lot of the issues around aging infrastructure and the new infrastructure that's needed for growth and creation of housing and of jobs. So where there's a gap between that capacity of these local counties and then the one size fits all solutions that are often offered by both granting agencies and our financial structures in the state of California. So it's been our effort at our CRC to try to fill that gap the best we can, either with technical support or to dive in and help several counties that have similar issues. We've been fairly successful in bringing hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure capital to our counties. I think that we've been most successful in the area of rural broadband, where we were successful in raising several $100 billion for the actual. But when you talk about capacity and then all of the obstacles that our counties face, whether urban or rural, you have to take into consideration weather extremes, timing for development, private investment. When thinking about rural economies, there's less private intervention or development occurring. We have environmental regulatory hurdles that all of the counties have. But when you have less capacity, again, it becomes more of a challenge. And those same counties have to hire consultants, engineers, and outside staff to be able to accomplish a lot of these projects to reach the stage where most of these programs are most effective, the shovel-ready level. And so you often see projects that are in need, that are initiated, but never really get off the ground because that pre-development level is never reached to be able to reach a lot of those programs, whether granting or financing, are available. So what happens is many of these counties are reliant on grants.
Okay.
And so it becomes a roll of the dice to try to access highly competitive grants, both state and federal. So most, of course, are not successful, and they take several years to be able to reach those resources that are desperately needed. And often, once they're received, it's a challenge because most grants are reimbursable. And a lot of grants require significant match. Match, again, another hurdle. We've been successful in creating a grant advance loan program that's a short-term cash flow program for counties that receive grants. And they need to start right away. And so we've been able to provide at least $5 million to those counties to get started. But that's just a drop in the bucket. So to wrap up, I think what we see in need for most of our counties is support, and that's technical support, engagement and knowledge sharing by our major institutions. And I think this one proposed to be very helpful in helping these counties create what can be very complex capital stacking to be able to put together packages that can actually get these projects built underway. And when I say projects, water, wastewater, health institutions, broadband, all of these things that are really becoming the lifeblood of these rural county survival and their ability to create jobs. I would say there's two answers to the question. Why should there be a focus on rural areas? One is that when you think about water, food, and energy and land masses that can be developed, that occurs in rural areas. And all of these are critical for the state as well as the nation. The other thing is, I've been involved in economic development for 25 years, both in the Sacramento areas, Bay Area, and the state. So I've been able to see kind of the urban side of this picture. And so this is last 5 years has been my foray into rural. So I see where there are significant gaps. There is definitely a lack of available land for commercial high-level job creating activities. And that pipeline is narrowing for a lot of reasons, because a lot of the land available is being absorbed by a lot of logistics operations and others that might not create the highest level jobs. The other side is it's becoming extremely difficult to bring that available land to the level that it can be addressed for infrastructure development and development itself. And I think that if that ramp were wide, there could be a huge opportunity to develop jobs in the city. So I'll stop there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, went ahead, do dive a little bit more as you
Yeah.
talked about some of the bridge loan funding that you guys are doing specifically to help with counties that
Sure.
are reliant on grants and that delayed funding.
Yeah, so we've provided loans for 14 counties. There's total, as I mentioned, about $5 million in typical loans. So, and it's a revolving loan. These loans are repaid after 2 years. That $5 million actually opened and unlocked about $80 million in grant funding, almost all infrastructure. So that's our ROI.
Yeah.
It's we offer it very low interest to recoup costs. But you know, whatever we can do to allow these counties to implement grants and not fall at risk of losing them for non-performance, that's our primary goal.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. First, not a question, but I do have a comment. I have to say, I really appreciate the work of RCRC and being an ally to the state. You're bringing me back to the days when I was the deputy for broadband in Digital Literacy.
Yeah.
So I love this topic. Hats off to Treasurer Ma and Chief Deputy Henning. This is incredibly important for our time. And with that, I do have the pleasure of introducing the last panelist, Michael Bennon. Michael is a research scholar at Stanford University, where he leads global infrastructure policy research initiative within the Center for Democracy, Development, and Rule of Law. His work focuses on infrastructure policy, project finance, and public-private partnerships, critical to this discussion, as he teaches global project finance and infrastructure governance at Stanford. Prior to Stanford, Michael served as a captain in the U.S. Army and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, with deep experience planning and delivering infrastructure projects in the U.S. and abroad. So, Michael, thank you so much for being here. You know, in the beginning of this panel, talking about the state of infrastructure, Treasurer Ma, of course, brought up, you know, what are other states doing? What are other countries doing? That is something that I know has been a discussion for several years and decades. So if you don't mind sharing, we would definitely be interested in hearing about what other states and countries are doing, as well as if there's any models of success that we can look to.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor to be here. So I prepared two comments along these lines of what are other states or countries doing? How does California infrastructure compare generally when our institutions and our projects as opposed to our conditions? And then another remark specifically around what other states are doing with public investment institutions like that envisioned by Senate Sensitivity. So on California, generally, I think California infrastructure is a real mix of extreme success and also extreme challenges. I hosted a bunch of international infrastructure finance public officials on. Okay. And I didn't have to take them far to show them a best-in-class infrastructure project. I drove them up to the Presidio Parkway project in San Francisco, which is 10 years into operation. It's not only a beautiful project, it is beautiful, but it's an extraordinarily well-structured project, and the state did an excellent job structuring the contract and aligning incentives. And I would put it up against any public-private partnership in the United States. My international guests also asked about California high-speed rail, which they were very well aware of. I can report, thankfully, that the $1.7 million toilet, which that's not international news yet, they weren't aware of that one, but we face challenges too. I think the underlying cause, obviously, our California's development laws are very unique. I think the real underlying challenge is that California it is the best place in the world. And there's a lot of demand for development and also a lot of resistance for development because of that. So that's kind of why we end up with extremes in our development outcomes. In terms of public development institutions, because I think the Golden State Infrastructure Fund has a role to play in kind of overcoming some of those challenges. The one comment I prepared, and maybe this is something that will also come up on one of the later panels as well, is around one of the key design decisions for this institution. So these are not necessarily uncommon. They're becoming more common. They range from the World Bank as a public development institution to the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, China Development Bank. And I think a close peer internationally to what's envisioned here is the Canada Infrastructure, which finances projects in Canada. One of the key design decisions for these institutions is whether they finance governments directly, local governments, or whether they finance projects with co-investment from the private sector. Many of them do both. But that's one of the key design decisions that they have to make. The Canada Infrastructure Bank co-finances infrastructure in Canada with private investors. That's a mandate, not just a goal. So they cannot finance projects outside of that mandate. There's pros and cons to that approach. One of the reasons that some public finance institutions take it is that it's catalyzing capital, right? So if we co-finance, we're also getting private investment into projects, so we're getting the that's all well and good. The idea is that there's a class of projects that maybe are nearly bankable, that with public support, with public finance, we can get them across the finish line. But I think one of the even more important considerations isn't catalyzing capital, but it's also co-financing is a very good due diligence mechanism for a public finance institution. When you co-finance projects, you are investing alongside a market-oriented investor or lender whose only interest is the economics of the project itself. The downside, of course, is that that's a constraint on the institution. And of course, an institution like the Golden State Fund would want to not only finance good projects, but put capital to work. So that's trade-offs. So those are my two kind of comparative comments. Happy to follow up questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Can you tell us a little bit about how successful or not the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has been?
So I think the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has been successful. It's now a very well professionally run institution. It co-finances a lot of projects. It has come under pretty extraordinary criticism. Well, it has come under criticism for not putting capital to work fast enough. And there are some in Canada who want the institution to finance more projects directly with governments, waiting for private investors to slow things down. It limits the number of projects that can be financed. And so that's been a point of criticism. It was criticized for not putting capital to work fast enough early. Now I think it's starting to overcome that as its project pipeline has started to mature and it's really putting. So I think that was an early criticism.
What kind of projects are they financing?
So it's similar
All of
mandate.
the whole.
So there's a lot of energy projects, renewables. They are doing transportation financing as well. Canada has a fairly large civic works, public-private partnerships industry, like public buildings, public facilities, and so they're in that sector as well. Public hospitals are public-private partnerships often in Canada, so they're in that space as well.
Yes, one question on, you mentioned that development law regulation. How much is that attributable to kind of the issue of cost overruns, expanding the cycle reduction, building versus the financing costs, which you mentioned is co-investment including one issue one solution to solving the problem, I think, in capital. So expand of capital. Yeah, right. So there seems to be a competing theme here, which is the longer it takes, the more expensive it's going to be. With these co-investment opportunities, private capital being very focused on efficiency, but more expensive. Public capital being perhaps available, but maybe not. Yeah. How do you balance those two?
Yeah, anytime there's project financing, there will be transaction costs, right? Delays, like arranging private financing does have a cost. The idea is to align incentives, right? In terms of the development laws, California's development laws are extraordinarily They're all there. One of the things that makes SQL, the reason it's also hard to parse, it's not a law like SQL. There's many states that have a law that reads very similar. Georgia has JIPA, Montana has NEPA. We have a lot of these laws, but what makes them unique is not necessarily the language of the law itself. And in many cases, it's how the state judiciary interprets the law. And that, I think, is very unique in California. So it's very difficult to parse the costs of that process, because many of the costs of that process are second and third order, as are many of the benefits of a law like SQL as well, are second and third order environmental benefits. So it's difficult to empirically parse that. So
I have a question since you talked about CEQA. These CEQA lawsuits are in line with everything else. All this felony, charges, why don't we have a CEQA court? Just like we have a traffic court or a family court, to kind of ease or, hear these cases by experts though. Because some of these judges that hear these CEQA lawsuits are not experts in CEQA, right? I mean, that's kind of a problem as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
yeah, there have been proposals. There's a great paper written, I think, about 10 years ago for a specialist CEQA court. That could be an interesting change that could adjust things, I think, on the margins. I think it could help clarify some of the case law around CEQA. At the end of the day, that's a big reform, I think, to change that. And also, I think one of the big challenges is that the statute itself doesn't necessarily provide a lot of detail in terms of what needs to be in a CEQA study. That's the fundamental challenge. Yeah, with a law like CEQA. So the courts really need to suss out a kind of the case law to kind of frame that up. It's challenging for a law like CEQA, mainly because you can an environmental study can include anything and everything, right? There's no clear kind of upper bound to when a study is complete. And that's why I think you get some of these extreme cases for very high conflict projects.
Any final questions? Thank you, Michael.
Thank you to our panelists. This discussion highlights both the scale of California's infrastructure needs and the urgency of movements in that. We'll now move to our second. Thank you. Before we begin, I want to briefly frame this panel in the context of SB 769. This bill is informed in part by the Illinois First Fund, a state-level infrastructure financing model designed to leverage public capital alongside private to advance infrastructure projects. Two of our panelists today, Rock Creek and Utica Infrastructure Management Company, have been involved in the Illinois First Fund, and they've been asked to share practical insights from that experience. So up first will be Siddharth Sudhir, a managing director at Rock Creek, where he works on infrastructure and other private market investments, including sourcing, due diligence, and investment selection. Thank you for joining us. Rock Creek has been involved in the First Fund, which has now been operating long enough to assess early results. Based on your experience, what outcomes has the fund achieved to date, and what key lessons, both successes and challenges, should California consider when evaluating a similar financing approach to SB 769?
So thank you, Connie. Thank you, President Moore, and everyone here. And we're excited to be here because of such an important bill, and happy to share our experience.
Are the speakers on? Can they hear on the?
Is it better now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So to frame my comments, I think it's important to distinguish the role in this partnership. So Treasurer Ferrex and the Illinois General Assembly provided a vision and legislature for the first fund. Our role as Rock Creek serves as the investment advisor. So it's one of execution. We are the fiduciaries responsible for taking the treasurer's vision and legislative concept that was developed over 3.5 years ago and investing that 5% of the state's portfolio into local infrastructure projects, of which my colleague Reed and Unico is one of them, and we'll talk more about that. So our goal is to protect taxpayers' capital and deliver on the economic promise that the Illinois Treasurer has promised his constituents. At Rock Creek, we view the first fund not as a grant program or providing subsidies, but a true double bottom line. We are proving in Illinois that a state treasurer does not have to choose between prudent returns and local impact. With the right structure, we can meet both objectives. We are moving state capital from a passive reserve role into an active capitalist role, de-risking critical projects so that private capital, like firms like Unico, can step in and feel confident instantly. To answer your question, Connie, on what are the outcomes to date, they've been very positive. It's been 18 months since we launched the program, and the model is working exactly as it was contemplated. I want to highlight 3 key achievements that I think validate how this model has worked. First is the crowding in of private capital. State capital can't be on its own. It needs a multiplier impact to really make a difference for the state. And the first one defines something called 2x multiplier. For what that means is for every dollar of capital committed, contractually private capital has to invest $2 in the state. This is critical because it means the state isn't shouldering the entire capital burden of infrastructure financing. Instead, the state's balance sheet acts as the anchor that pulls in private capital into the process. We saw this clearly. And other new areas of infrastructure like energy transition are equally critical. Third in terms of, Connie, your remarks on 3 recommendations as we have run this program for 18 months. I think the first lesson that I would take as we have kind of been managing this program is define what the local nexus is. The success of this model really relies on defining what in-state investments really are. In Illinois, for example, they were very deliberate in how they define an Illinois infrastructure development firm, namely those with a strong physical presence, their headquarters, their workforce, their operational history within the state. My suggestion to Californians would be to be equally rigorous. You want to ensure that the GDP multiplier, as I define it, is that the tax revenue, the payroll, and the supply chain spend stays within California. In just, as I mentioned, in the 18 months, we deployed 2.6 billion, and that has created a significant number of jobs for the state. If the capital is allocated to outer state firms that are not committed to the state, you lose the secondary economic benefits. The second thing is ensuring separation of power. One of the reasons the first fund works well as it does because of the clear separation between policy and investment selection. The treasurer set the policy boundaries, the geography, the labor standards, and the risk limits. We help execute. For SB 769, I would strongly recommend a governance structure that insulates investment decisions from political cycles. Extremely important if we want to attract private capital and top-tier investment partners for the multiplier. Third, structure this as an evergreen fund. Infrastructure is a long-term need. Infrastructure is a 15 to 30-year cycle, and as we heard in the earlier panel, requires a lot of capital over a long period of time to kind of get to a higher grade. So the way it works in Illinois, it's structured as an evergreen fund, meaning that as returns are generated from the capital and as returned, it's reinvested into new investments to make a difference. If California wants to solve long-term infrastructure deficit, it's necessary to have a long-term capital vehicle that is patient and disciplined, than a program rushing to spend an appropriation before a fiscal deadline. Evergreen Fund creates such a permanent self-sustaining capital base. To wrap up the Illinois experience, I would say that it proves that a state can be both a prudent fiduciary and a strategic builder. We have deployed capital that is earning market rate for their taxpayers, nearly 8% and just starting over 18 months ago, while helping the state's communities, residents, and workforce in both urban as well as rural areas. So we deploy both in Chicago and some of the main cities, but also outside. If California focuses on strong governance, a strict definition of what local impact, and partnership with skilled labor, there's no reason this can't be recreated in grander scale for the state. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. How does the state decide how to allocate capital between true public sources for typical infrastructure projects the state might have been involved with in the past, and the Illinois First Fund in a combination of both public and private capital? How does that decision process get made?
Exactly. So that the way it works is much of the public funding happens separately and as a standalone. So to the earlier panel, we need both. This is really targeted towards more private-oriented projects where public capital per se is not playing a role. So many of the investments that we are targeting is where there's investments which are targeted in the state, but there may not be per se public support or public financing. So it almost acts as a complement as opposed to a company.
Okay, so even though it's a public source of funding, you don't view it as a public source of funding?
No,
It's carved off the treasury.
Exactly. It's carved out and it's almost like it's looked upon as almost anchor private capital to encourage further private capital to come in.
And how was the state able to kind of allocate that capital and keep it separate, right? I heard your point about policy versus.
Yeah, so the way it works is the first fund is effectively on 5% of the state's treasurer's portfolio. So 1.5, right now, based on the current size of this Illinois State Treasurer, it's about 1.5 billion. And it has a separate team that is responsible from the Treasurer's office, which consists of both legislative and investment team members. We work closely with them on the implementation. So it's completely siphoned off from any of the policy. And we are responsible, the State Treasurer's office is the sole trustee. So we are responsible for reporting to the treasurer in terms of both performance and impact. That's the way it's kind of, so that there's no political pressure. And we have a clear benchmark in terms of what we need to deliver in terms of both returns, which are compared to what other private investors are getting the asset class, as well as what we produce is a certain impact report every year with how many job creation and where those dollars are being spent and how it's being unlocked. So
Yeah, some state treasurers have like sole authority to be the decision maker. Here in California, that is not the case. So, yes.
so it's a little bit different based on the governance structure in each state. That's how we define it. Well, so from our perspective, only just to end on that, I think we are the way we manage it, we're completely insulated. We report directly to the state treasurer's office. We have no constraint in terms of how the capital is deployed, as long as it fits within the specified guidelines for the mandate, which is what is defined in the legislative law.
And then who decides on the projects? Just the treasurer's office?
No, so the treasurer, so to keep it separate, as I mentioned earlier, which is our recommendation, we work with the treasurer's office in collaboration in terms of where investments are deployed.
So who we make the decisions?
We make
You
the
help that and then make the.
exactly as an investment fiduciary.
Okay, we are also joined today by Reed Singer, Managing Director and Head of P3 and Development at Ulico Infrastructure Management Company, which manages labor-backed infrastructure investments. Reed brings more than 25 years of experience in project finance, acquisitions, and asset management, including prior work as lead analyst at Fitch Ratings. We love Fitch here in California, covering major transportation infrastructure projects. And beside Reed is Michael Dorcas, also from Ulico. Thank you both for being here. I know, or we know, we just heard that Ulico has been involved in the Illinois First Fund, bringing a long-term labor-backed investment perspective. And we wanted to start on this section by asking, with your experience, what aspects of this model make infrastructure projects attractive to long-term investors, and what conditions need to be in place at the state level to encourage sustained investor participation in the fund like Illinois?
Great, thank you. And good morning, everyone. And thank you to Treasurer Ma and your team for your leadership on infrastructure and this issue. And we're grateful to be here. I'm Reed Singer, and this is my colleague, Mike Norcus. We represent Ulico, which is, I think, the U.S.'s only labor-owned insurance and investment management company. The product I sit in, the infrastructure fund, has been around since 2012. We're an open-ended core infrastructure investor. To date, we've raised and invested $6.5 billion in 27 different projects. But because we're open-ended, we're always growing and raising new capital and making new investments. And so the attractiveness of infrastructure to our fund and other institutional investors like ours, was really highlighted in the first panel by the huge need that we have in this country and in California in particular to invest in new infrastructure. And, we heard about the reasons for that, assets reaching the end of their useful life, the need for weather resilience, increased demand for electricity, and need to decarbonize and reduce carbon emissions. All of those drivers creating, tremendous demand for what funds like the Ulico Infrastructure Fund do. So public and private capital has flowed into these funds, primarily because there's a need, and also because there's many opportunities within this sector, not only to serve needs, but also to create very predictable, safe revenue streams for institutional infrastructure investors. That's because many of these investments, they deliver predictable, low-risk revenue. And the returns and cash yields that are demanded by both our union labor pension fund investors and our public sector investors. And that's because things that we invest in have revenue behind them, whether it's through people's electric bills, on transportation assets, the tolls and user charges, and on our energy assets, the power purchase agreements, and revenue streams that come with it. So you have a huge need and a predictable stream of revenue. And in Illinois, I think Treasurer Frericks and his team and the General Assembly recognized the attractiveness of this asset class, both in terms of its low risk core return characteristics, and they created the Illinois First Fund to put the state's investment money to work, both to derive these safe returns as well as to build projects around the state. So, as Siddharth mentioned, the first fund is well designed in that every dollar that the state puts in delivers $2 that are invested in projects across the state of Illinois. So we're really leveraging public dollars, private dollars that funds like ULICO can raise. And I believe, and Siddharth can correct me, I think ULICO was the first in the first fund. So we're the first of the first. We were the first investor, and we're very proud of that. We've been followed, I know, by many other investments. And this is really, it's kind of a rare thing that, it's really kind of a win for all sides here. The state treasury gets an investment with steady returns. The community gets the infrastructure it needs and jobs. The fund manager, ULICO, we get the opportunity to put capital to work and invest, which then creates more jobs and can generate more pension contributions to create further investments into our fund. So it's really a virtuous circle where, we invest, we create good paying, family sustaining jobs, which generate pension contributions, putting more money into our fund and more investment opportunities. And we think we can do the same in California with the program that you're proposing here. We know the needs are significant. We at ULICO, we have a long history. In fact, going back to our very first investment in 2012 of investing in the state of California. Our first investment is the Rialto Water and Wastewater Public-Private Partnership Concession in the Inland Empire. That's a 30-year agreement with the city of Rialto to operate and maintain both the water and wastewater system in that community. That's really a showcase example of our partners in labor who helped us get that project approved and move forward in 2012. The private capital that ULICO brought to the table to fund a initial capital improvement plan, which has now been completed. And now we're in the works for a second and a third capital improvement plan to upgrade the water and wastewater system as Rialto grows. Another great example of more recent investment that we did is our district energy system in Los Angeles. This is a system that provides chilled water to buildings and hospitals and universities across the country and has a significant presence in Los Angeles. This is a significant growth opportunity for our fund. And if we had more capital, we could expand that system, add more buildings to it. And really the whole purpose is driving energy efficiency. So each building doesn't have its own mechanical systems. We have a centralized system that can produce chilled water and energy more efficiently, saving money and reducing carbon emissions. Solar, wind, battery storage. We've heard about that from many of our speakers today. Huge opportunity. We know there's challenges coming in terms of federal incentives for that. We have significant investments in California in all three of those sectors. We are seeing a lot of opportunities for what's called repowers on these projects that have been in service for 5 to 10 or longer number of years. And there's opportunities to put in better technology on the same system. So you can produce more electricity in the same footprint. Opportunities to add battery storage to solar plants that basically extends the productivity of those plants beyond when the sun goes down. So we see a lot of opportunity to deploy more capital that way. In the digital and telecom sector, we have an investment, recent investment we've made there in a wireless telecommunications platform, adding more wireless towers and cellular connectivity, helping to make sure that people's calls don't drop when they're in rural areas. And that's another platform that we have in our fund. So Even within our existing portfolio, there's a tremendous growth opportunity that we have if we had more capital available, not to mention new investment opportunities that we could look at. If California is successful in implementing a program like Illinois First, we think, ULICO can do a lot more to improve California's infrastructure, while at the same time delivering a solid return on the state's investment.
Thank you, Reed. I'm just thinking about this because we issue the bonds for the UC and the CSU systems, and they go and build a lot of buildings, new buildings, and when I walk around, I say, hey, how are you handling your HVAC? And each building has its own, right? So I think there's an opportunity, but I think also if there's a way that we can also kind of push the envelope instead of doing it the same way that you've been doing it, there's just other models that are out there that we should be considering for all these reasons, right? Local jobs, economic development, better sustainability, but then also saving space. Instead of having to build a chiller HVAC on every single building they build, they can have one center, which is what we saw here at District Energy Center. But I just think there's opportunities that we can also incentivize, I don't know, through our bond placements or discussions, with some of these folks that we are selling bonds for.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think that was the question to kind of how do you divide the line between pure public capital, which typically has a lot of rules associated with it, because we issue tax exempt bonds, and kind of longer term investment type projects. Finding that dividing line would be really sounds like you guys have found it. And it's not in necessarily the traditional kind of public sector funding.
The treasurer, as those programs continue to grow, our CAPE program at the treasurer's office can be used for district energy.
Good to know. Okay.
Any other follow-ups? Thank you. For the second panel, I think it's just about outcomes as much as it is about capital, and so that brings us to our third and final.
Thank you.
And our third panel will be on economic development.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much for joining us here this morning. To start, I'd like to introduce our next panelist, Joseph Cruz, Executive Director of the California State Council of Laborers, representing more than 75,000 union construction workers across California. In his role, he represents labor for the legislature and state agencies and brings extensive experience on transportation, labor, water, economic development, and state budget. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to open with a question from a laborer's perspective. How does sustained infrastructure investment really translate into economic opportunity for workers in local communities?
Thanks for the kind introduction, first of all. And let me start by saying thank you and thank to the treasurer for putting on this event and sharing also the information. I've seen firsthand in all four of your elected offices, your commitment to making large investments in infrastructure, both on the local and state level, but more importantly, being a champion for working families in California. So thank you for your work. And to answer your question, it's important. Sustaining long-term infrastructure investment is not just about building projects. It's about building economic mobility, stable careers, and strong communities. You don't like what I was saying, obviously. But one of the biggest challenges that the construction industry faces is uncertainty, right? When infrastructure funding fluctuates, so do job opportunities. Workers experience layoffs, inconsistent hours, gaps in employment that impact their families and financial stability. SB 769 is a great tool in the toolbox. It provides a dedicated source of ongoing financing, free from the volatility of year-by-year budget cycles. And this allows for public agencies private partners to planned multi-year projects, which we have because they're large scale, with confidence. And for workers, what this translates to as a certainty is stable careers instead of seasonal or intermittent work, predictable hours and income, allowing families to budget, to save, and to invest. Continuity in apprenticeship and training programs, which also rely on this consistent funding, is important for reliable work hours, and SB 769 will help facilitate that. Every major infrastructure project funded in California will require a skilled and trained workforce in SB 769. Laborers, operators, carpenters, cement masons, and many more. We not only have short-term jobs, these are career opportunities for these individuals. A pipeline of steady to bring more apprentices on board with a steady, consistent investment. Workers can complete training faster, but with more consistent hours in their apprenticeship programs. And new workers from disadvantaged communities can gain access to lifelong family-sustaining careers. The laborers, and I appreciate 75,000 workers in California. We're not just building our transportation, water, energy, logistics infrastructure, but we're building a future in California with a workforce that's steady. Our members want what a lot of folks want in that consistency. Research shows that this consistency in infrastructure investment has a high economic multiplier. For every dollar invested, it creates $2 of economic activity in California. And why is that important? Because laborers, carpenters, operators, they get an opportunity to buy a home. They buy a car. They spend money at local restaurants. The small businesses would also stimulate our local economy. Young children attend good public schools. They use local healthcare and services, and most importantly, they pay local taxes. And the laborers see firsthand how fragile California's aging infrastructure has become. Levees fail, water mains break, wildfires and storms overwhelm old systems. These failures are expensive for residents, businesses, and governments alike. A long-term investment in projects that get in front of this aging and in front of the threats of wildfire, that upgrade our water infrastructure, our flood control systems, levee improvements, our clean energy, grid modernization. This will all build for a more resilient infrastructure, which ultimately will lower some insurance costs in California that obviously are burdening a lot of homeowners as well. One of the strengths of 769 is its ability to combine state dollars, federal dollars, and private investment. You heard from our investment partners. This model stretches every dollar further. California. Communities, especially small and rural communities, often lack the tax base or bonding capacity to support major infrastructure projects in their communities. This bill fills that gap by providing a statewide financing engine that benefits all regions, not just the wealthy ones. This ensures rural towns, inland communities, disadvantaged neighborhoods all receive the same economic opportunity that comes with infrastructure development. For labor unions and for the laborers, SB 769 is not just an infrastructure bill, it's an economic justice bill. Reliable infrastructure means, and I'll close, good jobs. Still don't like what I said. Strong apprenticeship programs, community reinvestment, safer and more resilient neighborhoods, growth in local businesses, and lastly, more equitable economic opportunities across the state of California. So thank you for the time. I hope I answered your question, but I can answer a few more if you want.
Thank you.
You did talk about, electrification and, other opportunities. So maybe after Jeremy speaks, the utilities, clearly don't have the capacity that we need, on many levels, right? For housing, but also for, technology that's coming up. And I'm just wondering if this model would also help the utilities scale up faster, because, there's always that issue. They want to invest, but then they have to please their shareholders. They don't want to increase rates too high, and so nothing gets done. Then we have to field the calls trying to push utilities, to go faster. But that is definitely, I think, a big concern for a lot of these projects. So maybe after Jeremy speaks, you all can give me some feedback on that.
Any other additional questions?
David.
We're also joined by Jeremy Smith, Chief of Staff and Director of Workforce Development for the State Building and Construction Trades Council of California, which represents nearly 500,000 tradespeople, including approximately 70,000 apprentices. Jeremy brings deep experience in workforce development and labor policy and currently serves on the California State Workforce Investment Board. Thank you for joining us, Jeremy. From a workforce and labor standards perspective, how do strong wage standards such as prevailing wage support skilled workforce development, project quality, and long-term economic value in infrastructure investments?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I come through, okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for being here today. Thanks for having both Mr. Cruz and I here today. We appreciate the time, Madam Treasurer, you're spending here today with us to talk about the labor side of this. We've had a lot of discussions today about investments and return on investment, and rates of return. We're thankful that you and your team added space for the people who are going to be building the things that under SB 769 will be funded. I think it's very important to keep the workers in mind. So we're very grateful to be here today, and we're grateful for the conversations we've had with you and your staff and Senator Caballero staff about amending the bill in the spring to ensure not only that these projects will pay the prevailing wage, but that they also incentivize the use of a skilled and trained workforce and the use of project labor agreements. A word quickly on each of those. The skilled and trained workforce definition lives in Public Contract Code Section 2600. Requires a 60% threshold of the workers on a funded project to be graduates of state-approved apprenticeship programs, which help ensure California workers are going to do these jobs, they're trained, they've been through robust training programs approved by the Division of Apprenticeship Standards and the California Apprenticeship Council. And then a quick word on project labor agreements. I'm sure the treasurer, in years working with her from her time in the legislature, believes that you want to put local workers to work on these projects. And project labor agreements, which is part of the proposed amendments that will hopefully go in the spring, can do that. I've seen project labor agreements with local hiring requirements down to the zip code level in certain areas of the state. In fact, the Sacramento Kings Arena is a great example I always use. They were down to the zip code in Sacramento County, hiring targeted workers out of certain areas. But everything that we're talking about today in those amendments, prevailing wage, skilled and trained workforce, and project labor agreements drive that idea that we want to put local trained workers to work. Now a quick word about the prevailing wage, specifically to answer your question. It's a middle-class wage. Looking at the dais here, many of you know this already, but it bears repeating. It includes a base wage rate on the check, and then contributions on the check for healthcare, for retirement, for vacation, sick. A little bit back on every worker's per hour paycheck goes back to his or her apprenticeship training program to train the next generation. So in short, it's a middle class wage, family sustaining wage. And these requirements, the requirement to pay prevailing wage, puts money in the pockets of local blue collar workers, as Mr. Cruz pointed out. Most importantly, though, because prevailing wages require the payment of health and retirement benefits, covered blue collar workers who toil in, I think what we would all agree is one of the most dangerous professions in the world, are going to be getting health care coverage. They're going to be able to go to the doctor if they are not feeling well, if they get injured on the job.
And this helps take strain off of the social safety net, which I'll finish with in a couple minutes, just some stats about the construction industry. And the payment of the prevailing wage does not just help journeymen and women, but also apprentices. Another key point, apprentices are construction workers. They are on a job site learning under journeymen and journeywomen, and they are earning a percentage of the journey person's wage. So while they are not all the way, they have not journeyed all the way through their apprenticeship training program, they are construction workers. And by using apprentices, you're not only providing a place for them to learn their craft and become journeymen and journeywomen, but you're saving taxpayers some money because those apprenticeship wages are a smaller percentage of the journey person wage. So incentivizing the use of apprentices from state approved programs is very critical. Furthermore, workers earning the prevailing wage have typically been through state approved apprenticeship programs, which promote extensive training, experience, and safety awareness. These trained, experienced, and safety-aware workers are most likely to practice safe working conditions and finish the job on time the first time. What we've not done, and we should do, but what I haven't seen either, is what is the return on investment? What is the cost of doing business for getting a job done right first time under budget, and not having it drag weeks and months on because you did not use trained workers to do the job the first time. We need to do a better job of promoting that idea, and we are working on that. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, as I wrap up here, a note about the construction industry and why the prevailing wage and the middle class benefits that it provides is so important. A recent use of the labor center study found 19% of California construction workers who were independent contractors were misclassified. 2/3 of those are paid under the table. These workers earn 67 cents for every dollar earned by properly classified workers, earning a median wage of $14.98 per hour to do construction work. So vision yourself roofing a house in July in Sacramento, earning $15 per hour. Construction worker families are 1/3 more likely to participate in one or more of California's safety net programs, which accounts for almost 9% of the total safety net expenditures for all California workers. Again, the prevailing wage, the reason we have it, the reason it's so important is it provides a holistic middle-class livelihood for workers so that they aren't depending on state, county budgets aren't strained, state budgets aren't strained to provide not only their income, but their health care. And just finally, I'll end with this. Developers and builders getting taxpayer dollars through SB 769 and the fund that it sets up should be made to ensure that the jobs they create are high road family sustaining careers. Thanks again for the time today. I'll just quickly touch on your question that you asked. I would argue, and I don't, there are lobbyists out there who represent the utility workers in a very good way and are much smarter on this. And I would say though that the utilities are under a lot of stress right now. You mentioned some of those things. Wildfires is one thing that they're dealing with right now. And so I think providing them some funding to help them harden their what they own and expand out and make them more efficient is going to provide jobs for my members I represent, but also help those utilities make those investments, which I know they think they need. But it's just where do they find the money when they have to enter as shareholders to do that work?
Yeah, I'll just follow up briefly. Thanks, Jeremy. The affordability issue, obviously, California is alive and well. When it comes to the price of gas, the price of groceries, the price of utilities, those are all major concerns with people from every walk of life. We've done some good work on the petroleum side to stabilize price of fuel in California. You see it at the pump now. I think we have to make major investments in our energy infrastructure. AI is going to drive our state economy, data centers, right? The need to build data centers in California. One of the biggest challenges of data center construction is the lack of the enough of the electricity to totally power them up. So investments to our grid, also making investments to undergrounding or existing infrastructure for utilities is important. I think they ultimately will play a role in driving down the utility costs. But this whole balancing act between shareholders and ratepayers is above my pay grade. But I think the state has a role in making and helping make those investments to drive down costs for my members, which is important.
I think we should add to underground to the fact sheet, because I think, you know, China doesn't have these wildfire issues because all of their wires are underground. But it does cost a lot of money, as we know, and not every community can afford it. They're not prioritized, so I think that would be good. So Jeremy, you mentioned, I'm gonna take this opportunity to talk about one of our savings programs, Scholarship 529, because it really is a program for working families. And I know a lot of our brothers and sisters in labor don't necessarily use the program because as a labor union, you do provide, certain funding so that your apprentices could go, to your training programs. But what we have found is more people would probably save money for higher education and apprenticeship programs if they could use the money not only for tuition, but I know you guys all pay, but they need equipment, they need transportation, they need housing, sometimes they need childcare. And if that was available to them, I think more women may also, enter the workforce because they can afford to take 3 or 4 or 6 weeks off, to do the training that is necessary. So that is something that I've been pushing. It's a federal program under IRS code section 529 under our scholarship program. But being able to expand it to use for these type of ancillary education related apprenticeship programs, I think would help, our working families. Secondly, we have been pushing a tax credit or a tax incentive so that families would open up a scholarship 529. Right now, because we don't offer any tax incentives, many families that are with Fidelity or Schwab or some financial advisor, they open up the Utah plan or the Virginia plan or some other state. They don't even know they're doing it because they just, work with an advisor and then they say, oh, we want to open up these, educational plans. So that's another thing. If we could create an incentive, these financial advisors would have a fiduciary duty to tell their clients, you should open up a California plan because you get an incentive, a tax credit, or a tax break. So that's something we're working on. The way I think it's interpreted sometimes is that these tax incentives are for wealthy people. Wealthy people don't open up scholarship 529s. Okay. And you all know that, right? Police, firefighters, teachers, nurses, they all know about 529. So that's kind of a misconception. And the bill that was amended last time, the income allowability was so low. It's like, for those, making just barely minimum wage, they're not going to be putting $500 every month into a education apprenticeship program. So would love your help. We're going to keep trying it. As long as I'm around, I'm going to keep trying it.
As long as you have good ideas, we're here to
I think I can help.
help you out.
Well,
No problem.
And if you don't mind, if it's just take a moment, I mean, for women especially, access to childcare is the number one reason why they leave the apprenticeship system across all the crafts. And there are single fathers who are also raising children, right? It's not just women, but it's mainly women. I think as a society, child rearing falls on the shoulders of women more often. We do have a system through DAS, the Equal Representation in Construction Apprenticeship Program, the ERICA program, to provide stipends for childcare. So to your point, being able to use 529 monies for childcare or for just the things in life you need to be able to make ends meet, especially those first couple years of an apprenticeship program where you're making above the minimum wage, but you're not making the journey person's wage rate quite yet, it still can be tight. And so that's a great idea. We would be happy to support that idea to make those 529 plans usable in other walks of life. Yeah.
And the ERICA program has been amazing. The laborers are part of the biggest beneficiary of the ERICA grant program, which funds daycare for apprentices who enter state approved apprenticeship programs. And we're seeing a growth within the women and the laborers really focused on traffic control. Traffic control has been a really big sector growing sector of our labor union, which is bringing a lot of young women into the industry. And we're changing people's lives who've worked at, and nothing wrong with working at Walmart, Target, McDonald's, but we're giving them opportunities now that have full pension, healthcare, a future in California. Not, like I said, not just a job but a career. So
I would love to have another conversation about this coming together as a bill idea, but I do kind of want to bring it back to the infrastructure bill that's in front of us. And Mr. Cruz, good experience with the California Transportation Commission, sitting on that, lifetime working with infrastructure projects, and Jeremy, you on the workforce board. I think that you guys are uniquely positioned to answer this question. One of the biggest criticisms we oftentimes hear about being more money towards infrastructure is there frankly just not enough work. How would you guys respond to that criticism?
Well, my answer, depending on if I've had maybe a long day or we're drinking somewhere with somebody when they say that to me is, well, how many workers do we need? I hear this a lot in the housing space. The housers, the developers, we don't have enough workers to build housing. But they can never tell me how many they need. They assume that they don't have enough. And snarky Jeremy would say they can't find enough construction workers to pay minimum wage for housing. The creation of job sites churns the system. The laborers, the operators, the electricians, any of the crafts, they do not run apprenticeship programs unless there's a place to go to work. Construction workers don't sit behind a computer screen or learn out of a book. There's some of that. 85, 90% of it across the crafts, you're on a job site. If there's not a job site to go to, why are we bringing in apprentices? Why are we wasting their time when we can't even train them? And so we don't think there's a job or a worker shortage. If there is, yeah, there's a job shortage. I heard that. If we do subscribe to that idea, the act of creating more investment in more projects fixes that quote unquote problem. Because you're going to churn the system and have a place for workers to begin their journey through their apprenticeship program.
thanks for the question, Bradford. And I would agree there's not a shortage of workers in California. There's a shortage of qualified workers, I will say. But in the laborers that have been doing a good job of really targeting sort of different parts of our industries to recruit more workers. We sort of pride ourselves on being the labor union that attracts second chancers, people of color, and women. As a college degree becomes more expensive in California, across the country, working for a union craft becomes a more viable option. Being a construction worker becomes sexy again, right? Like a lot more people are looking at construction, and especially union construction jobs, as an option for them. And as much as we like everybody to go to college and graduate, 23% of high school students in California get a college degree. And where does that leave? The remainder, right? Hopefully we're an option. And we can provide that middle class job, to buy that house, buy that car, send your kids to college. But we need more investments in infrastructure. And ultimately, infrastructure investments are going to drive the need to bring more construction workers online. Government does a lot of things people would say wrong, right? I don't necessarily agree, but what they do right is invest in water, energy, transportation, and creates opportunities for a lot of people who wouldn't have an opportunity normally.
Thank you to our panelists. Now we will open the hearing for public comment. Members of the public who wish to comment may do so on this. Stand up and join some phones here. And if you are attending virtually and would like to share a public comment, please raise your hand on the screen. And as you do comment, please state name and organization if applicable.
Good morning, Madam Treasurer and members. Raymond Contreras, Lighthouse Couples Affairs, on behalf of the Michaels Organization. I want to start by thanking the treasurer and her staff for holding this informational hearing. The Michaels Organization is a premier owner, operator, and developer of multifamily housing in California and the country. They are the only national developer, owner, and operator, private and public, who can truly solve all the cities and states' household needs. They work on everything from deep subsidy, public housing to tax credits, workforce, student, and high-end market housing. In 2022, the California Department of General Services and the California Department of Housing and Community Development have selected the Michaels Organization to transform 2 blocks in downtown San Diego, specifically on Front and Ash, into sustainable, innovative, and high-quality, affordable, and mixed-income housing. This project is set to deliver approximately 1,447 new residential units, with approximately 60% designated as affordable housing. Additionally, in that same year, via AB 140, $4 million was set aside for demolition. However, recent estimates during the demolition from DGS indicate that a total cost for this effort has risen to $12.7 million. Securing these funds is crucial for the timely transformation of this underutilized site of housing in San Diego. Next year, we will be advocating for additional funding from the state to complete this demolition. The Michaels Organization believes that workforce, attainable housing, and student housing should be treated as essential infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Any other members of the public that wish to comment? Process anyone online raising their hand? No. Letting that no one like the public comment. You know, to the treasurer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoy these informational hearings because we get to hear from the experts. We always learn a lot. We are not experts, so we depend on all of you to give us the talking points and, you know, put things in our brains that we may not have thought about originally. And I think for me, I got a lot out of this, and I think at the next hearing, I'll be able to talk with more specificity and with more confidence, hearing all of you talk about some of the challenges and the barriers, but also the opportunities. And I think the big takeaway is there's no lack of workers. There's lack of jobs, good union jobs. And this is what SB 769 is going to create, those opportunities, because infrastructure does create those jobs. So I think that's the big selling point. And we're going to maybe rework some of my talking points when I'm there, because that's what we need. We're facing a structural deficit of $18 to $30 billion ongoing. We are highly dependent on these unicorn companies. Hopefully they stay. And energy is one of my concerns, is that they're going to move to some other state or other country that is generating energy not in the clean way that we are doing here in California. And so how do we keep these jobs and these type of, you know, taxpayers, tax revenues here in the state? So I think we got a lot of ideas here today that we can incorporate in terms of what this bill will potentially solve some of the most difficult problems that we have been struggling with on being the leaders in all of those industries on that report card, and having a C minus, 20 years later, it's terrible. Okay. C minus is, what is it? See you later. Like, don't even talk to us if you're in, a family, right? So, we just have to do better. And this has been an ongoing trend. I've been doing this 30 years, and I think we've been a C minus for 30 years, even though we talk about it. And during the COVID, we did have record surpluses, $46 billion the first year, $96 billion. Kudos to the governor and the legislature for putting so much in for infrastructure. Because of our GAN limit, we're really limited on where we could put all those surpluses, but it still wasn't enough. And we're still facing the same problems. Sites Reservoir is still not built. The dams are still, having problems. Our bridges and our roads, and we still can't build enough housing. I mean, on and on and on. So anyway, I just thank you all for coming and, listening to some of my, diatribes, since I have you all here. I'm always pushing ideas. I need support. The more I hear what you're working on, the more you hear what we're working on. I think we're gonna build better partnerships moving forward. So I just want to thank all of you for participating here today. I want to thank my team, Connie and Russell. They run a very robust legislative package, just the two of them. So just want to give them kudos. And then to my executive leadership team, they're the best and the brightest. And I'm just very, very happy and proud to be the state treasurer. And I'll just open it up to them to make final comments too.
Just thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Really enlightening to sort of see the real push behind this legislation. We have to do better, as the treasurer said, to invest in our future at a more consistent rate.
You all. Okay, here.